During the reign of the Persian Empire, which spanned several centuries, from the Achaemenid dynasty through to the Sasanian era, the concept of justice was both revered and feared. The Persian Empire, one of the largest and most powerful empires in ancient history, held an intricate system of laws and punishments. Yet, behind the grandeur of its palaces and the glory of its kings, lurked a dark side, the cruelty of executions, especially for those deemed to be enemies of the state or rebels against the empire's rule. Executions during the Persian Empire were often public, meant to instill fear in the hearts of its subjects. The method of execution varied, depending on the severity of the crime and the status of the prisoner. These brutal acts were meant to assert the power of the king and the legitimacy of the empire's rule. But what made the executions particularly cruel was the way they reflected the empire's intense belief in maintaining order and loyalty. One of the most common forms of execution was impalement, a gruesome and horrific method used for serious offenses. This form of execution was not just a death sentence, it was a message to the people of the empire. Victims would often be forced to endure hours or even days of excruciating pain before succumbing to their injuries. The sight of a body impaled on a large stake was intended to shock and terrify the populace, sending a clear message about the fate of those who challenged the authority of the Persian rulers. Another method, which was perhaps even more insidious, was the execution by exposure. This form of execution was often used for prisoners of high status or individuals who were considered traitors to the empire. These prisoners were often left in desolate places, such as the desert, to die of dehydration, starvation, and exposure to the harsh elements. This method of execution not only served as a cruel punishment, but also as a stark reminder of the empire's ability to decide the fate of even the highest-born individuals. The Persian rulers, from Darius the Great to Xerxes I, used these executions to maintain control over their vast empire. The fear of such brutal punishments kept many within the empire's territories in line, but it also led to resentment among the conquered peoples. Those who opposed the empire's rule knew that defying the king's orders meant certain death, often in the most horrific ways imaginable. However, executions weren't just reserved for those who directly opposed the empire. Sometimes, even the most minor offenses led to death sentences. The Persian legal system, while advanced in some respects, had its own form of harshness. For instance, anyone caught stealing or committing fraud could be executed without much of a trial, especially if the crime was perceived as a threat to the empire's stability. In these cases, the death penalty served as a deterrent, a constant reminder of the price of disobedience. In addition to physical brutality, there was also the psychological torment that often accompanied executions. Prisoners were sometimes forced to watch the executions of their loved ones or fellow prisoners before they were executed themselves. This public spectacle was meant to break the spirit of the condemned and send a clear message about the empire's uncompromising stance on loyalty and lawfulness. But why were these executions so extreme? Was it simply about control, or did the Persian rulers truly believe in the righteousness of their methods? In many cases, it seems that executions were not only a means of maintaining order, but were also deeply tied to the empire's religious and cultural beliefs. The Persian Empire, particularly under the Achaemenid dynasty, was heavily influenced by Zoroastrianism, which emphasized the eternal battle between good and evil. Those who defied the empire were often seen as agents of evil, and their execution was viewed as a necessary act to restore cosmic balance. Despite the extreme measures taken by the Persian Empire, it's important to note that the empire also had a reputation for fairness in some respects. The famous Persian king, Darius I, is known for establishing one of the first codified legal systems, which outlined specific punishments for certain crimes. This system, known as the Darius Code, ensured that the law was applied evenly across the empire, though the severity of punishments remained harsh. Over time, as the empire expanded and came into contact with other cultures, the methods of execution evolved. While the Persian Empire maintained its brutal punishments, some areas influenced by Greek and later Roman law began to incorporate more humane practices. However, even as the empire's legal system changed, the memory of those cruel executions remained an indelible part of its history. The execution of prisoners during the Persian Empire is a subject that raises many questions about the nature of power and the lengths to which an empire will go to preserve its authority. Was it necessary to use such extreme measures to maintain control, or did these acts reflect a deeper cultural belief in the righteousness of the king's authority? The brutal executions were not just about punishment, they were a symbol of the power the Persian Empire wielded and a tool used to instill fear and ensure loyalty across its vast territories. In the end, the cruelty of these executions highlights the dark side of an empire that achieved incredible feats of expansion and governance. While the Persian Empire's legal system may have been ahead of its time in many respects, it also carried with it the brutal legacy of a civilization that used fear and violence to maintain order. The cruel executions, in all their forms, are a reminder of the cost of power and the lengths to which an empire will go to protect its rule. These stories, though they happened centuries ago, continue to captivate and disturb us, offering valuable insights into the nature of power and the harsh realities faced by those who lived under the shadow of the Persian Empire. Whether seen as a necessary evil or a tragic reflection of the empire's authoritarian rule, the legacy of these executions endures as one of the most brutal aspects of the Persian Empire's reign. As we delve deeper into the complexities of the Persian Empire's system of justice, it becomes clear that executions were not just a tool for punishing individuals, but a strategic means of maintaining control across a vast and diverse empire. The Persian kings, particularly during the Achaemenid and Sasanian dynasties, were not only rulers, but seen as divine representatives on earth, charged with upholding order and enforcing laws that kept the empire intact. This sense of divine authority granted them the power to dispense life and death as they saw fit, often without any mercy or reprieve. While the methods of execution remained gruesome, they were, in the eyes of the ruling class, a necessary aspect of maintaining stability. These brutal punishments were particularly effective in an empire as sprawling as Persia, where rebellions and revolts were constant threats. The vastness of the empire meant that there were a multitude of cultures, languages, and religions, and the Persian authorities understood that their rule needed to be both feared and respected. For the common people, witnessing these executions served as a constant reminder of the power of the king. The public nature of the punishments was key. They were not just acts of violence, but performances that illustrated the king's power to the masses. These executions were carried out in public squares, where the populace could observe the spectacle and feel the weight of the king's judgment. To disobey the law was to risk a gruesome death, and the fear of such a fate kept many people in line, reinforcing the Persian idea that the king's word was final and his power absolute. But there was also a more philosophical element to the cruelty of these executions. In the eyes of the Persian rulers, those who defied the empire were seen as enemies of the state, or worse, enemies of the divine order. The concept of Zoroastrianism, which was deeply embedded in the culture of the Persian Empire, was centered around the struggle between good and evil. The Persian kings believed that by carrying out such executions, they were not only punishing wrongdoers, but also serving a higher purpose, to rid the empire of evil and preserve the cosmic balance between order and chaos. The Persian Empire's emphasis on law and order meant that even the smallest infractions could lead to death. A thief could be executed, a traitor with no hope of redemption. But what made these punishments particularly cruel was not just their finality, but their unpredictability. The laws, while written down, were often applied in ways that seemed arbitrary to the common people. The execution of a royal family member for a minor offense, or the brutal punishment of an entire village for the actions of one individual were not unheard of. The Persian rulers were both the lawmaker and the executioner, and their decisions were final. No appeal, no mercy. The psychological toll of living under such a regime cannot be overstated. The fear of execution loomed over every aspect of life within the empire. The brutal nature of the punishments meant that citizens lived in constant uncertainty, never knowing when they might become the next victim of the king's wrath. This culture of fear, perpetuated by the brutal executions, was a tool that kept people in check, but also bred deep resentment and hatred towards the ruling class. Even as the empire progressed and new rulers took control, the tradition of public executions continued. The fear of rebellion was ever present, and the threat of cruel punishment kept many from even thinking of defying the king. Yet, despite this oppressive system, the Persian Empire continued to thrive for centuries. Its legal and administrative systems were advanced for their time, and it became a model for many future empires. However, the empire's reliance on fear, control, and violence as the foundation of its authority left an indelible mark on its legacy. The final years of the Persian Empire saw the decline of the Achaemenid dynasty and the rise of the Sasanian Empire. While the methods of execution did evolve, the underlying purpose remained the same: to assert the king's absolute power. The Sasanian rulers, much like their Achaemenid predecessors, utilized brutal punishments to suppress any opposition to their rule. Though the methods became more sophisticated, involving the use of death by hanging, crucifixion, and boiling, the core philosophy remained unchanged. The power of the king was absolute, and those who defied it would pay with their lives. The public spectacle of execution continued into the later stages of the Persian Empire's history. The executions of high-profile individuals, such as generals, political opponents, and traitors, were meant to send a message to the entire empire. Their executions were not just acts of retribution, but reminders to the people of the price they would pay for defying the imperial authority. And in the case of those who challenged the king's rule or committed acts of rebellion, their executions were often especially cruel, meant to serve as warnings to others. The fear surrounding these executions led to a complex relationship between the rulers and the ruled. On the one hand, the rulers maintained a tight grip on power through the threat of death. But on the other hand, the cruelty of these punishments sowed seeds of discontent. The Persian Empire, like many empires before and after it, was ultimately a reflection of the struggle between the need for control and the inevitability of rebellion. As the Sasanian Empire eventually fell to the rise of Islam in the 7th century, the brutal practices associated with executions during the Persian Empire began to fade. But the legacy of these cruel punishments would live on, serving as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which empires would go to maintain their power. Today, historians look back on the Persian Empire as a complex civilization, one that achieved remarkable feats in governance, culture, and military strategy. But alongside its accomplishments stands the dark reality of its justice system, a system that relied heavily on fear, intimidation, and cruel executions to maintain order. The Persian Empire's legacy is a testament to the power of empires to shape history, for better or worse.